Hello everyone, and welcome to the Vortex, where lies and falsehoods are trapped and exposed. I'm Michel Voris. 3 years ago this week, Pope Benedict issued the order that the traditional Latin Mass could be said by any priest anywhere without the permission of a bishop. He had to include the part about without the permission of a bishop because too many bishops were blocking it, making up silly excuses about why it shouldn't be said and on and on. In fact, Pope John Paul had issued his own directive about 10 years earlier, nicely asking the bishops to be generous to Catholics who desired to attend the Latin Mass. Most of them smiled nicely and politely threw his directive into the circular file. So Benedict, nicely and politely, went around them and gave priests the authority to say the Mass without the bishop's consent. Now this raises a curious question. Why would so many bishops be opposed, openly or quietly, to the traditional Latin Mass? The Mass has been around, with small variations, since about the 6th century. It was made the official Mass of the Church in the 16th century at the Council of Trent. That's where the name Tridentine Mass comes from, the Council of Trent. This was the Mass that was changed after Vatican II. So, the Mass that is only about 40 years old replaced the Mass that was roughly 1,500 years old. Thousands of saints attended the old Latin Mass as well as offered the old Latin Mass. It was Catholic, as Catholic could get, but in a very rapid series of changes, it was suddenly all gone, or mostly gone. For a church that normally takes centuries to decide practically anything, the speed with which the Mass was changed could be compared to the speed of light. But a small group of people here and there all over the Catholic world continue to hold on to the old traditional Latin Mass. Finally, John Paul asked the bishops to be nice to them and let them have the Mass said in individual dioceses. The bishops ignored him. Then Benedict, as we said, ignored them and allowed the Mass to be offered by any priest without their permission. So why the opposition to the Latin Mass? Even where some bishops have allowed the Mass, it's almost always in some rundown parish in the dangerous or seedy part of town at some really bad time of the day that makes it difficult for families to get to for all of the above reasons. Why are so many bishops and very many priests demonstrating such enmity towards this Mass? Now, leaving aside charges of Freemason conspiracies and secret encoded warnings from heaven, it would appear that the reason is theological. The Latin Mass doesn't really allow for many abuses. Sure, there were some, but nothing like we see today. It's a very strict, disciplined, by-the-book way of offering Mass. In fact, that was the point. The new Mass, the Novus Ordo, whether it was intended or not, is open to massive abuses, and those openings have been taken full advantage of by liberal bishops who love the idea of a freewheeling party in the sanctuary, to priests who have seen fit to promote their own personal version of the faith. The new Mass has openings in it, in which clowns or animals can be brought into the sanctuary. Are they supposed to be there? No, of course not. Have they been brought in? Oh yeah, by the arkful. The problem with the new Mass isn't so much the Mass as the attitude of those who like to use it to promote their own personal style of Catholicism. They make up lines, ignore the disciplines. They make it much more about themselves than God. In short, too many times the focus of the Mass, the new Mass, is on the priest, or the singers, or the lectors, or the annoying army of Eucharistic ministers tramping into the sanctuary. By the way, the correct term is extraordinary ministers of the Eucharist, as in they aren't supposed to be an ordinary part of the Mass. They are extraordinary. See the difference? If you have a parish that has a weekly rotating schedule of hundreds of millions of Eucharistic ministers, then exactly how are they extraordinary? The bottom line is for many, not all, but many, who are doggedly dead set against the Latin Mass is that they imply they don't want to share center stage with Jesus. Remember him, that God guy, the one who the Mass is actually about? In the intervening years since the new Mass arrived, the spotlight has switched from God to man. The notion of sacrifice has been replaced with the secondary notion of a meal. The meal is important only because it's a participation in the sacrifice, not just because it's a meal. Quite frankly, in terms of it being just a meal, it's pretty sparse. You get more of a meal with the donuts at the coffee klatch after Mass. And herein lies the problem. In the 40 years since the new Mass, the instruction about what the Mass truly is, a representation of the sacrifice of Christ on Calvary to the Heavenly Father, the drama of our redemption, This truth has been ignored or watered down and trivialized. And that starts a downward spiral until eventually what you see in most parishes is something that kind of looks like a Catholic-Protestant hybrid. The danger in this is reflected in a very old Latin phrase, Latin, fittingly enough, lex orandi, lex credende. How you pray is how you believe. The last 40 years have proved the truth of that statement. I'm Michel Voris.